There was a unique feeling in the air, like the silence between two waves, every time I walked past the community pool entrance before sunrise. My name is Gabriel. At 27, I lived the banality of days like someone walking the same path, always mindful of my own steps, but never changing direction. I worked in digital creation at a small agency. I dealt with pixels and tight deadlines, but rarely with intense emotions. In recent months, after closing a long and turbulent chapter with an ex-boyfriend, I became increasingly introverted, almost invisible outside of work. The pool became my refuge. There was a time when nothing happened there except the ritual of strokes and the deep sound of my own heart beating underwater. The isolation, once uncomfortable, became daily company. My alarm always went off at 5:40 a.m. I'd put on my sneakers, grab my chlorine-damp backpack, walk several almost deserted blocks, and arrive well before the first wave of families. The strong smell of chlorine filled my lungs, and the steam rising from the water blended reality and dream. The pool was my territory, solitary and protected, where I could exist without expectations. If you also believe that even the most ordinary days hide surprising stories, go ahead and like and subscribe, because what I'm about to tell you will move you. The community pool was nothing extraordinary. Worn tiles, locker rooms smelling of soap and disinfectant, rows of orange plastic benches almost always empty in the early hours. Behind the main block, a light blue wall was peeling, revealing old layers of paint. But for me, that space was sacred, immune to the passage of time. It always started the same way, walking through the iron gate, feeling the cold floor under my bare feet, putting my backpack in the same rusty locker, giving a discreet nod to the still sleepy receptionist. I'd take off my flip-flops, leave my towel perfectly folded on the bench closest to the edge, and stretch at the poolside, my body submerged from the shoulders down in the morning breeze. The first few minutes were just mine. The cold water woke every muscle, and the muffled sound of my body cutting through the surface calibrated my thoughts. Each lapse of time underwater felt like a silent eternity, an interval where the outside world disappeared. The steam rising, the first streaks of daylight filtering through the high windows, the constant trail of my own movement. For a few laps, I didn't even remember pain, past or future. I just existed, light as the foam that forms in the wake of a well-executed swim. There were almost never other swimmers at that hour. Sometimes, I'd cross paths with a disciplined elderly person or a hurried mother training for some race. But solitude was almost the rule. For months, this routine was my only safe haven, my survival routine. It was on an unsuspecting Tuesday, as winter was already giving way to slightly golden mornings, that I noticed something different. Someone was sitting at the edge of the pool, exactly in the spot where the sun hit directly, as if they had chosen that location for the view or perhaps for anonymity. It was impossible not to notice. A tall guy, dark brown hair falling to one side, a keen gaze following every move of the few swimmers. At first, I thought he was just there out of curiosity, maybe waiting for someone. But he came back the next day, and the day after that, always with a book in his hands, feet dangling in the water, a restlessness in his eyes like someone who wants to participate but doesn't know how. Sometimes I'd finish a set of laps, emerge to breathe, and catch his gaze fixed on me, quickly darting away when he realized he'd been noticed. For weeks, we created a kind of silent dance. He watched, I swam, but neither of us had the courage to break the silence. That grew inside me, a mix of strangeness and expectation, as if a piece of the scenery had come to life, a curiosity not just about him, but about what could exist outside the routine. It was on a less cold morning, with light streaming in clear shafts through the window, that it finally happened. I got out of the water, grabbed my towel, and as I passed by him, I heard his low, hoarse voice. "Do you always come this early?" I stopped, surprised, and looked closer. His name was Ian. He was 25, had just moved to the neighborhood from a small town in the countryside. He worked remotely as a literary content editor. He said, almost apologetically, that he'd never learned to swim, and that he was fascinated by those who seemed to master the water so naturally, an element that for him was synonymous with nervousness and insecurity. The next few minutes unfolded into an awkward but authentic conversation. I discovered that Ian liked modern poetry, old black-and-white movies, and aimless walks at dusk. There was an almost shy kindness in his manner, a genuine curiosity about everything around him, as if he was always on the verge of asking an important question. The contrast was evident. I, accustomed to controlling my body and environment, closed off, methodical. He, open to new things, flexible, but insecure. However, there was something in common, an elegant solitude, a search for meaning that transcended the cold surface of that encounter. After that first contact, it became impossible to ignore Ian's presence in my days. We started meeting almost every morning, always at the same time, always in that suspended tranquility of early day. Little by little, he swapped the book for conversation. He'd approach the edge, wait for me to finish my laps, and strike up a chat about some seemingly trivial detail. A book he'd finished, a series he'd binged last night, a question about the best coffee shop in the neighborhood. The naturalness with which we dove into these conversations surprised me. We talked about everything: the repetitive daily grind of my agency, the publishing houses he worked with, the literary references that united us, childhood memories, old fears, small daily victories. Each morning, I noticed my routine transforming. My thoughts stopped revolving around the past and began to orbit around the present, around the anticipation of our next meeting. It wasn't long before we started sharing small rituals. When I arrived earlier, I'd bring him a hot coffee, and he'd reciprocate by bringing pain de queijo or a sweet treat from a bakery he'd discovered. One day, I helped Ian fix the pool's umbrella stand, which had been jammed for weeks, and he insisted on sharing his favorite playlist with me while we did the work. We shared laughs over the awkward improvisation, creating little traditions that only made sense to the two of us in that particular universe. It was all very subtle, without any more intimate gestures, but with each exchange, I felt a growing complicity, a silent understanding, a desire to prolong those shared minutes before the world fully woke up and the pool filled with voices and children's noise. Ian never seemed rushed. Even when I was already late for work, he'd invent a reason to stay just a few more minutes. Listening to him talk, or simply sharing the comfortable silence of someone who doesn't need to pretend anything. During those weeks, the closeness brought to light feelings that, until then, I thought I had buried. However light, fun, and spontaneous my friendship with Ian was, there was a latent tension, a discreet nervousness in every gesture. I'd catch myself looking too much, searching his face for signs of something more, feeling butterflies whenever he touched me, even lightly, when handing me a cup or a book. The fear of diving headfirst into another story, of getting hurt again, was real. Many nights, I'd lie in bed wondering if I was being naive to believe that this time could be different. The past still echoed, like an undertow, reminding me of the pain at the end of my previous relationship. The truth is, I was afraid of making space for someone precisely because I knew how much it can hurt when the other person leaves. Ian, in turn, carried his own weight. One day, after much insistence, he revealed that he had a real phobia of water. He told me that as a child, he almost drowned in a river during a family trip, and since then he felt a mix of fascination and terror seeing other people swim with such freedom. Moreover, being new to the city, not yet having close friends there, meant those mornings were his only real moment of connection. He had a mix of gratitude and insecurity in his eyes, as if he feared going too far by trusting so much, but at the same time, he seemed unable to help it. The obstacles weren't just internal. Some days, the weather would turn, and a cold wind would blow over the pool, making the ritual less inviting. Other times, the presence of others, a group of students, noisy instructors, broke the intimate atmosphere we had been cultivating. Amidst all this, we felt that our time there was always on a knife's edge, as if a small slip could burst that bubble of comfort and expectation. It was during one of those cloudy mornings with the sky threatening rain that Ian surprised me. We had already been talking for almost half an hour when, with a hesitant voice but steady eyes, he asked, "Gabriel, would you teach me to swim?" The request hung between us, laden with vulnerability and a desire for change. It was as if, at that moment, he wasn't just asking for a lesson, but offering me the chance to enter even deeper into his story. And I knew, then and there, that I was facing a decision that could change everything moving forward. When Ian asked me to teach him to swim, time seemed to stand still around us. The echo of his voice vibrated in my chest, a mix of anxiety and courage. I understood that his request was about more than just swimming. It was about trust, surrender, and the desire to conquer a fear he'd carried since childhood. It was an invitation to get even closer to who he truly was, not just the fun friend from our pool mornings. The night before our first lesson, I barely slept. My body alternated between anticipation and nervousness. 1,000 scenarios came to mind. Me trying to explain the technique, him hesitant, the possible accidental touches, the awkwardness, the risk of crossing a delicate line. But in all these thoughts, One constant remained: the desire to care, to be supportive, to make it work. Saturday dawned with a clear sky, but a low mist hung around the pool, giving the place an almost secret feel. I arrived before Ian and prepared everything. I got 2 foam noodles, a kickboard, and placed our towels side by side, aligned on our usual bench. There was almost no movement, just an elderly man stretching on the other side, and the instructor setting up materials for the kids' classes. When Ian arrived, I immediately noticed the nervousness in his eyes, masked by a shy smile. He wore navy blue shorts, a worn white t-shirt, and held a bottle of sunscreen, twirling it between his fingers. He descended the steps slowly, sitting on the edge without rushing. With every movement you could feel his accelerated heart, his short breaths. I sat beside him. "Ready to try?" I asked, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He nodded, but his eyes betrayed an old, almost childish fear. I wanted to convey lightness, so I started by showing him that the first step was just to wet his feet, feel the temperature, realize that the contact with the water wouldn't be abrupt. Then, I asked him to place his hands on the surface and just feel the gentle invitation of the water running between his fingers. When he finally got in, I stayed by his side, in comfortable silence, respecting his pace. Ian gradually got used to it, wetting his wrists, his arms, and only then his face. I never rushed him. I just sat with him, showing that rushing was not part of that morning. After several minutes, he knelt on the shallowest step, looking at me for silent approval. I knelt too, very close, and explained the first notions of flotation. Water can be an ally. If you trust it, it will hold you. Relax and take a deep breath. Don't think about sinking. Just think about letting your body be light. Ian did as I asked. He stayed still, eyes closed, slowly inhaling and exhaling. I gently placed one hand on his back, the other on his shoulder, just so he knew that no matter what happened, I would be there. I felt the warmth of his skin contrasting with the cold water, the discreet tremor of his muscles trying to obey the command to relax. "I'm here," I whispered, more to calm him than anything else. The initial tension transformed into a subtly intimate atmosphere. The touch, once so technical, began to gain another meaning. With each attempt, Ian lay back a little more on the surface, trusted a little more in my support, and I recognized in my gestures something beyond mere professionalism. It was care. It was affection. It was a silent desire to protect. "Relax your neck," I asked, lightly running my fingers over the back of his neck. "Imagine you're lying in a hammock, feeling only the gentle sway of the wind." He smiled, eyes still closed. For a few seconds, his body truly yielded. His shoulders sank, his muscles lost their stiffness. I felt his weight become light, truly floating, until, realizing his success, he opened his eyes, startled, and ended up sinking, returning to the step, but with a look of surprise and happiness that completely disarmed me. "You did it," I celebrated, letting my hand linger longer than necessary. "I only did it because you were here." The way Ian looked at me in that instant threw me off balance. There was more than gratitude there. There was a mute confession, a wordless question about the limits of that closeness. The next attempts were increasingly fluid, more confident. The learning atmosphere gave way to a sensory connection difficult to describe. At one point, I asked Ian to lie on the water once more, this time holding only my hands by the wrists, without support on his back. Our eyes met. The water, warm in that sunlit strip, reflected the patterns of our movement. The environment seemed to be just ours. With him supported, floating, I felt his breathing synchronize with mine. The muffled sound of our bodies in the water, the smell of sunscreen and chlorine, the warmth of the sun on wet skin. Everything contributed to creating a bubble of complicity. Holding his wrists, I slowly guided him, feeling the silent affection passing through our touches. Until, in one of the attempts, while helping Ian sit up again, I got too close. We were face to face, water up to our waists, so close I could feel his breath meet mine. His eyes searched for something in mine, first hesitant, then sure. Without knowing for sure who moved first, the space between us dissolved. His hand rested on my shoulder. His fingers lingered there. The silence was broken only by the subtle sound of the water. I moved closer, smelling his skin mixed with the morning freshness, and rested my forehead against his. For an instant, there, only 2 breaths mingled, 2 bodies attentive to the slightest sign from the other. The first approach of our lips was timid, almost a touch, an unhurried invitation. The taste was of novelty, but also of home. With each second, the kiss deepened, more confident, more real. Our bodies, semi-submerged, became lighter. Hands explored backs, necks, shoulders, as if searching for hidden memories beneath each drop of water. The outside world disappeared. Only we remained, immersed in the water, our hearts racing, the sensation of skin against skin. Every touch seemed to heighten the feeling of discovery. A shiver here, a sigh there, until everything dissolved into an embrace where desire and trust mingled. The pool surface reflected the sunlight in golden patterns on our faces, making that bubble of silence and touch even more intimate. Nothing was rushed. Every movement was savored. Every gesture carried intensity. Every pause was an invitation to continue. We stayed there, testing the limits of closeness, playing with our senses. Ian exploring my neck with short kisses, I slowly running my fingers through his wet hair, both of us giggling softly at every slip, every beginner's stumble in this new territory. When we pulled back just enough to breathe, I felt my body lighter than ever. It was as if, floating beside him, I had finally allowed myself to leave behind all my old fears. Ian noticed, smiled, and rested his head on my chest, listening to my still racing heartbeat. Funny, I thought I'd be terrified in the end, but I feel good, he confessed, in a low voice. That was just the beginning, I replied, hugging him gently. We have the rest of the day to go further. The water, a silent accomplice, continued to sway our bodies, cradling that encounter which marked not only the end of a fear, but the beginning of something much bigger. After the kiss, the silent surrender, and the timid touches that evolved into a tight embrace, we sat back down on the edge of the pool, side by side, our feet dangling in the water. The silence was comfortable, full of small laughs and knowing glances. It took a few minutes until one of us remembered that, technically, we were there for a swimming lesson. Ian grabbed his towel, dried his still flushed face, and looked at me as if searching for words to describe what he felt. I guess I never imagined learning to swim would be so. He searched for a word, gave up, and just finished with a wide smile. I understood perfectly. Inside me, the feeling was like having crossed an unknown sea, overcome the currents of the past. His touch, the kiss, the trust, all of it seemed to renew the color of the world. We stayed there for a long time, talking about the whole process, him opening up about his old terror, me sharing my own insecurities, recalling childhood stories, life landscapes I'd never told anyone about. His vulnerability gave me the courage to open up about my own frailties too. From that day on, our morning meetings gained a new meaning. The swimming lesson became a pretext to be together. Every stroke, every new attempt to float was mixed with laughter, soft confessions, new discoveries about each other. The touches, once justified by learning, became natural, spontaneous, extensions of an affection that no longer needed an excuse. Ian gradually overcame his fear of the water. He started trusting his own movements, relaxing, playing, losing the fear of sinking on his own. But for me, the biggest transformation wasn't technical, it was emotional. He allowed himself to be vulnerable, to be helped, to receive affection. In this process, I realized how much I was also evolving, opening myself up again to feel something genuine, shedding my defenses. The intimacy in the water was reflected outside it. The text messages, the coffees after practice, the unspoken promises that we wouldn't run away. One day, finishing our practice, Ian looked at me and said, seriously, but with a twinkle in his eyes, I thought learning to float was just a matter of technique, but I'm realizing it's about trust. First in you, then in myself. The phrase echoed within me. It was as if that pool, the setting of so many old solitudes, was now the stage for our discovery. The water, once a territory of fear, was now a bridge of trust. I ended that day with a quiet certainty. Some encounters truly have the power to renew us completely. And so, a new routine was consolidated. Each morning brought a lesson, a surrender, and a safe space where we could be exactly who we were, without masks, without defenses. The pool, once a solitary place, became a shelter for two bodies and two stories, mixing courage and discovery in every stroke, every touch, every kiss exchanged on the blue surface. There you go. Here's the second part, rich in detail, atmosphere, and emotion, continuing Gabriel and Ian's story in a sensory and engaging way. We can move on to the conclusion whenever you like. The following weeks unfolded with a lightness I never imagined I could breathe again. Each morning with Ian felt as if life had invented a new season between the end of winter and the beginning of spring. He, little by little, transformed from a spectator of his own life to the protagonist of our small universe. He was no longer just the shy guy by the pool edge, but someone who, in the water's reflection, finally found the courage to see himself whole. The intimacy grew almost effortlessly. Our conversations deepened even further. We talked not just about fears, but about big dreams, small plans, everyday silliness. One day, we were sitting on the shallow steps, the sun on our backs, and he opened his heart in a way he never had before. "Do you think it's really possible to start from scratch?" he asked, swirling the water with his feet, creating small eddies that reflected the blue sky. "I don't think we ever start from scratch, Ian," I replied, smiling. "We carry baggage, some scars, but if you have the courage not to repeat old patterns, to try again even when scared, that's a fresh start." He fell silent, thoughtful. Then he told me about his family, conservative, distant, people who learned early to swallow feelings to please others. Ian admitted, with a lump in his throat, the anguish of perhaps never being accepted for who he was. He spoke of the burden of hiding his truth out of respect for his parents, and how he felt that for the first time, he would have to face that abyss, not just for him, but for both of us. At that moment, I felt the world slowly spin. My chest tightened. I had been through similar experiences, frustrated attempts to be seen and to belong. I knew firsthand the fear of rejection, the desire to keep everything secret just to avoid pain. At the same time, I knew that only by living our truth could we breathe easily, without halves or pretenses. A few days later, Ian asked me to talk outside the pool. We sat on a park bench, under the shade of an old tree, the wind rustling his hair. He took a deep breath, like someone preparing to dive. "I set up a time to talk to my parents. I'm going to tell them the truth about me, about us. I know it might be difficult, but I don't want to live a life that isn't mine anymore. I don't want to hide you. I don't want to hide myself." The courage in his eyes, the way his voice trembled and yet moved forward, deeply moved me. I placed my hand over his, telling him I'd be there, no matter what happened. The day of the conversation was one of those cloudy Sundays that promise rain but only deliver wind. Ian left early with a serious expression, and I stayed home, restless, imagining all possible scenarios, from best to worst. The clock seemed to stand still. That night, he returned. His face was tired, but there was a new gleam in his eyes. He sat beside me on the couch, leaned his head on my shoulder, and remained silent for a long time. I respected the silence, feeling that, in that pause, there was a whole world of feelings. It was hard, but I did it. I said everything I needed to. They didn't understand immediately, but they didn't kick me out of their lives either. "I guess it'll be a process," he said slowly with a faint smile. "For the first time, I feel like I'm truly living, even if it still hurts a little." My eyes welled up, not from the fear those moments brought, but from the immense strength of someone who decides, even while trembling, to defend their right to exist. I hugged Ian for a long time. There, in that silent exchange, I understood that it was much more than a pool romance. It was about belonging, about having a haven in each other. After that milestone, everything changed in a subtle but irreversible way. Our routine continued, swimming lessons, shared breakfasts, knowing laughs, but our encounters had a deeper meaning. We were choosing to stay, not out of convenience, but out of courage. It wasn't about defying the world, but about giving ourselves the chance to live what we deserved. The pool, which was once just the setting for our connection, became a symbol of personal triumph. It was there that Ian asked me to witness his crossing. For the first time, he wanted to try swimming from the shallow end to the deep end, submerged, trusting only his own breath and what he had learned. It wasn't a test for others, but for himself. On the agreed day, we arrived before the sun. Steam hovered over the water, making the environment almost dreamlike. Ian took a deep breath, looked at me with that expression that mixed fear and confidence, and dove in. I accompanied him alongside, attentive to every movement. The crossing wasn't perfect. He hesitated halfway, lost rhythm, but persisted. And in the last meter, he emerged, gasping, victorious, with a smile so wide it seemed to illuminate the entire hall. I moved towards him, hugged him tight, and felt that in that instant, he had crossed not just the pool, but an entire sea of insecurities, limitations, and old pains. We stood there, side by side, hands intertwined on the cold tile edge. Looking back, I understood the magnitude of the journey we had traveled. There were no more doubts about staying or leaving. We were determined to build, together, a story where both of us could be whole. There was no need to promise forever. It was enough to live the now, with truth and presence. The following days were a celebration. We exchanged small victories. He cooked for me for the first time. I introduced Ian to my closest friends, laughing at inside jokes that only made sense to us. There was a new lightness hovering over everything, but even with the joy, there was also room for nostalgia and reflection. On certain mornings, after practice, I would see Ian sitting at the edge of the pool, his eyes gazing at the horizon, like someone thanking their own past for not giving up. I would stay by his side, sharing the silence, feeling that journey was, every day, a rebirth. That's how I understood. Goodbyes don't always mean an end. Sometimes, saying goodbye to old versions of ourselves is the greatest gift we can give to ourselves and to those we love. In the calm of the days that followed, I found myself mentally revisiting every detail of that journey, from the first stolen glance by the pool to the hug after the final crossing. It was as if, with each memory, I could see nuances that had previously gone unnoticed. The embarrassed way Ian smiled when he approached me, the meaningful silences in our conversations, the quiet courage with which he faced his own ghosts. None of this would have happened if it weren't for the decision to dive into the unknown. If I had recoiled from the fear of getting hurt again, if Ian had let his terror of the water speak louder, if we had ignored the subtle electricity that formed every time our hands accidentally met, probably our days would have remained the same, predictable, safe, and solitary. Today, looking back, I see that everything I experienced with him was a lesson. Just like in the water, I had to trust that, even without seeing the bottom, I would be able to float, to breathe, to rely not only on myself, but also on the other. I learned that vulnerability is not weakness. It is a bridge. That recognizing limitations, asking for help, allowing yourself to teach and be taught, all this is synonymous with courage. The pool, which was just a setting, gained a soul. It became a witness to our blossoming, a stage for discoveries, for the most sincere conversations I've ever had, for the most delicate touches, and the most necessary kisses. And especially, it taught me that for every journey, two ingredients are fundamental: trust in the other and trust in oneself. In the months that followed, we kept our tradition. We woke up early on Saturdays, found the sun rising over the calm surface of the water, and, before swimming or talking, we just floated together, hands intertwined, eyes closed, hearts aligned. It was a silent ritual of gratitude for what we were, for what we survived, for what we continued to choose in each other every morning. Ian became part of my life, like a favorite season, like a perfume that lingers after a hug. He found space in my home, among my friends, in my plans, and, more importantly, in my way of seeing the world. There are still difficult days, of course. His relationship with his parents is still developing. Future doubts still knock on the door. But now, we have learned to swim together, to face the currents without trying to fight alone. We are a team, a partnership, a mutual haven. Reflecting on all this makes me see the magnitude of the change. I didn't just give swimming lessons to Ian. In fact, he also taught me to float, over the surface of everything that scares me, over the old abysses of affection and surrender. I discovered with him that you can fly even with your feet in the water. You just need to trust, and allow the other to hold you when necessary. If you've made it this far, maybe you're expecting a grand finale, a soap opera ending. But the great truth is that the best stories don't end. They continue. They transform. They gain new chapters every day, with the smallest gesture, the smallest glance. The extraordinary is in the details, in the silences, in the fresh starts. And if at some point in your life you find yourself standing at the edge of your own pool, whatever it may be, remember, it's worth diving in. Fear is just the beginning of a new journey. The risk, however great it may seem, is the exact measure of the reward. And sometimes, all that's missing is the courage to ask for help and a little willingness to float. If this story touched you in any way, leave a like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel. Because here, every week you'll find real stories about fresh starts, courage, and love. Stories that sometimes begin with a simple request. Will you teach me to swim? Allow yourself to dive in with us. See you next time.